everyone. I'm Barbara Beck, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to Welcome Home. Today's program is a little different from any that we've done before because we're going to be talking about life after a spouse dies, in particular when a wife dies. Sounds like a very heavy subject, and it is. But when you figure that there are 2.7 million widowers in our country who are in need, then perhaps this is a subject that we need to be discussing. Does a widow, the woman, have an easier adjustment than a man when the woman dies first? Listen to these alarming statistics that I found. 65% of widowers will experience an acute illness within 12 months. The suicide rate among widowers is 3 to 4 times that of married men. Well, today on Welcome Home, we have a guest, Herb Knoll, who is committed to supporting, in particular, men who have lost their spouses. Herb will help us understand the grief process and give us tools for guiding widowers through the difficult days when they are devoid of a loved one's voice or presence. We'll also be talking to Chad Garman about what the YMCA is doing in Central Florida to care for the caregivers out there. And he's brought with him one of our esteemed local pastors, Andy Searles from Church Together. I know this will be a very valuable program, but before we get to our special guest, let's see what the current ladies have to say about being a support system to those in need. Welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Hello. Glad to have everybody here with us today. You know, when we're talking about caregiving and people in need, it's a tough subject. Anybody experience any of this firsthand?
Well, I will talk because right now my mom has been caring for my dad. He had knee surgery and it went fine at first. And then about 3 weeks after he was starting to rehab, they realized he had a staph infection. And so he had to go back in and cut the knee again and clean it out. And it's been harder on my mom than I thought. They also have a new puppy. And so between the puppy and my dad, my poor mother is ready to go into the hospital herself. And it's just, you know, and it's been interesting because I've called my sister and said, listen, when are you moving down to Florida? Because I'm not going to care for these two myself for my whole life. And we've laughed. But it is, I think it's shown me, we all take our health for granted and we just think we're going to be healthy and in good health forever. And it's super hard. And my dad has been, he's always got a smile on his face and he has been miserable. And it has been an eye-opening. And it's been interesting because we've had to kind of say, well, Dad, this is how a lot of people live, like in chronic pain, in suffering, whether it's cancer or whatever it is. And my sister's son, he had a brain tumor and he was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And so my sister has been a little bit hard on, just been like, well, guess what? I lived in the hospital with my son for 6 weeks. And so welcome to reality. So it's just not easy. There's a lot of stress, I think, when it comes to chronic illness or debilitating stuff.
Yeah. Well, tell your mom I'll take the puppy.
Yeah. But not the dad, right?
And let's remember, you've been caring for your mom for how long, Barbara?
Well, yeah, my mom is 95 years old, and I am her primary caregiver. She does have help during the day, but it is a tough situation. But it's probably easier for her than had my dad outlived my mom, because we're talking about how hard it is also for widowers. I know that my mom's boyfriend, who is 94 years old, younger man she went after. That's cute. His wife died before he did, and Bernie has had a very, very difficult time. Fortunately, he hasn't had an acute illness. He hasn't, had any problems other than incredible loneliness. And so who takes care? And he was a caregiver for his wife before she died. And who takes care of the Bernies of this world? And there are plenty of them out there. It's tough. Anybody else have experience? You're going to have to care for me one day.
I know. So I'm watching you do a really great job with Mammy, and so that you're being a good example. So it's care well for you.
It's very hard. I know one of the coolest things that I've heard recently was from Howard Dayton, who said that if you will view every time you do something for somebody who's need, every time you are a caregiver, you are serving Jesus. And that really does help me when I walk into my mom and I see her and I'm praying, oh Lord, just help me have a good attitude and be right and good with her. I'm serving Jesus. I'm not serving her. So that definitely does help. Anybody else experiences?
Well, I have a question. Since you are such a great caregiver for your mother, how does your family give back to you?
That's really a good question.
There you go. How do you give back to her?
I know. I don't know that we do the best job at that. I mean, mom's love language is quality time, for sure. She doesn't want to go get coffee. She doesn't want to go out to eat. She wants to play. She wants to go on a bike ride, play tennis. She wants to be interacting while we're playing a game of some sort. And so Kelsey, if you're watching, Dad, if you're watching, me, we need to do a better job of engaging with her in fun activities that gives you a break.
I think sometimes if you are a caregiver and I'm relatively young, I'm not in my 90s yet, I'm not a widow or whatever. I think people do forget about some caregivers sometimes. And there are days that I feel like I am all alone. And it is a hard, hard job. And yet, I haven't spent 6 weeks in the hospital and doing there's always somebody whose plight is worse than yours, but that doesn't diminish the difficulty of the journey.
And I read a statistic that said if you are a caregiving spouse between the ages of 66 and 96 and experiencing emotional and mental strain while you're caregiving, you have a risk of dying that is 63% higher than that of a person within that same age bracket who is not a caregiver.
Wow.
So really it puts such emphasis on the strain of
You need to remember
caregiving.
that.
I know. I know. Well, I took some notes. So if you're experiencing things like sleep deprivation, anxiety, stress, all these things, there are some steps to help you.
All right, here we go. Let's go.
Number one, accept help.
Okay.
That's good.
Kristen, you can come over tomorrow.
That's right.
Number two, focus on what you can provide.
Okay.
Because you may not be able to provide everything and you need to get help in this other areas. Get connected with people who are in similar situations, set realistic goals of what you can do, and maybe even find a support group. And that's actually how Bernie met Mammy.
Right.
He was in a grief support group after his wife passed away.
Right.
And I just
Is there a support group for caregivers?
I bet there is.
There are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
And a lot of online ones as well.
Really?
And very specific ones, like for certain diseases or certain issues with people.
Okay. To just vent with people.
I think it's important too, and Kristen, thank you for that list. I think that's great.
It is.
But I think to add to that list, I think as a caregiver, Barbara, and to your mom, I think it's important to communicate what you need. And a lot of times we don't ask for what we need. And I think a need is different from a want.
Yeah.
A want is something that if I don't get it, I'll be okay. But if you don't ask for what you need, people don't always know how to support you and how to help you as you're dealing with it. I have a young lady at my church whose father is blind. And her mother was his primary caregiver. To your point, Kristen, the mother was taking care of a grandchild as well during the day, while the mother of the child worked. She went to the school, picked up the grandbaby, went back to the house, and she was in the bedroom and fell. She had a heart attack and died. And now her blind husband the kids have to take care of him. But the point is, a lot of times the caregivers end up passing away before the person that they're taking care of, because you run yourself in the ground and you don't step back. And a lot of times I think caregivers will feel, particularly in the case of a wife taking care of a husband, she'll feel guilty about not being right by his side every waking moment. Well, my philosophy is this: if you're in the hospital, there's a lot of people that are being paid to take care of you. And so I don't think you have to be there every waking moment. You have to be able to sleep. You have to be able to rest and rejuvenate so that you're able to serve that person and do it, Barbara, even with a good attitude. So you need a break. You need a vacation.
Yeah, and I think
we need to go get ice cream.
I would oh gosh, I'm all there. I'm there with you for the ice cream. I think sometimes as a caregiver, you're so stressed out and so unfocused on what your own needs are that you don't even know. You just said you don't let anybody know what you need. I don't think I know what I need. Until you just said that about you need to go on a bike ride, you need to go play tennis, you need to have some fun. Yeah, I know I need to have some fun. I don't exactly know how to make that happen as a caregiver when there's so much other stuff going on. But I do have to tell you one cute story. The other night, Charlie was over, my 11-year-old grandson, I always say number one adorable. I don't mean number one that I love him the most. I mean that he's number one in the birth order. So he's over, and we were totally stressed. Tons of people over, lots of grandkids, brand new baby was there at the house, a lot of stuff going on. And I said, Charlie, you got to go put Mammy to bed. You remember? He's like, okay, what do I do? Okay. I'm like, well, you got to have her go to the bathroom. You got to have her brush her teeth. You got to take her socks off. You got to put her in bed. You got to Charlie, my 11-year-old, was like, I'm in. He's there doing it. So I'm busy with food and doing other things with everybody else. And then I went to check in to make sure that he had done everything right. And it was just so precious. It was just one of my favorite times that I've seen Charlie serve in that way.
That is precious.
Isn't that cute?
Really
That
neat.
is, I mean, because we come in as babies and we leave as babies. It is so interesting, the cycle of life. And it's actually so sweet to think of Charlie caring for his great grandmother like that.
And I love you saying that, because it reminds me, but that really is his giftedness.
It is.
It's compassion. And I don't know that we, what's the word?
Facilitate that, implement it.
Yes, enough. Like call on that. There's other things that we have Charlie do. That's the area that
he loves it.
He feels valued in. He's good at it.
Yeah.
So send him over.
Totally. I'm like rethinking.
I know. Bedtime every night is at 7:00 p.m. Just send him over. He can take care of it.
Well, I was going to tell you that when my sister lived out of town, my parents would travel a lot to see her. And I did not do a good job of taking care of my grandmother because I have 3 young children and a husband who travels. And so, but there were some times when she couldn't find help that I had to come in and put Mammy to bed or stay. I don't know that I ever stayed overnight with her. And I would be like, okay. But the times I did it were the sweetest times. They were just so sweet. And we would sing hymns, and we would just, she has two twin beds in her bedroom. And so I'd lie down on one bed and she would lie down the other. And it just, you can call on me to do that because it's just sweet.
Okay, tonight at 7:00, I'm going to put you on the schedule.
We'll check up.
No, it is hard for you because I know where you are. But when we do serve, it's a great feeling.
Yeah.
You know?
That's it.
But you just got yourself 2 volunteers.
I know.
So,
I know.
But how do you respond to that as a caregiver? You have to open up and you have to be able to say, can Charlie come over on Thursday night? Kristen, can you do it? One night a week from each of them would give you a little bit. And I think, and don't feel guilty about it. Because
I think I go the other way. I'm more the martyr. I'm way beyond guilt. It's just like, oh, woe is me. I have to all this stone. I kind of do a martyr thing sometimes. And some people wallow in that as caregivers. They kind of enjoy the attention, saying, look what I'm doing. Wow, look at me. Oh, poor me. You know, and we don't need to go there. We need to go there.
Well, and it's also the oxygen mask analogy. Like you as the caregiver, you know, we get on the plane, they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then help others who need assistance. If you don't get oxygen, you're not any good helping. If we don't have what we need, we're not any good helping the people that need our help.
Right, spa day, I'm there.
I learned that, Barbara, when I had to have surgery. Never been sick. The only time I'd ever been to the hospital was to have babies. And I told you the story about me having to have colon surgery. And when I got home, I could do nothing for almost 2 weeks. And it finally hit me that my family could survive without me. That's a really weird thought, is that my kids could live without me. Well, they took care of me for 2 weeks. Like all the meals, laundry. It was amazing to see my husband work so hard. But that's the thing. It's like if we don't take care of ourselves, we're no good to anybody else.
Well, if somebody's been very quiet on the panel today, and I know, Becky Hunter, that you have had opportunities to be a caregiver, right?
Yes, I have. When my mom had Alzheimer's before her passing, and so I think, it's one thing to do things for someone when they're aware, and there is another level when they're not aware you're doing it that I think is inexplicable unless you've been through it. But
it's harder, right?
It's just I think it's harder. The first time that they say, who are you? Is a rough moment. And so when you have those caregiving moments and you can call on someone to help, I think too, more than doing a lot of caregiving myself, I have watched caregivers extend themselves like to the point of death. I have, and it's just unbelievable. But I think one of the things that, as a person who cares for caregivers, if you can, avoid the, hey, let me know if there's anything I can do, and say the thing we've been talking about, what do you need? And not let it go, because they need something. And it's just very specific, and you can plug in at whatever point really makes the most sense. I think it's harder too when you don't know the person well.
Right.
Because you can step into something when you kind of know their environment, know their stuff, but when you don't, it's challenging.
Yeah. Well, the Bible's pretty clear about helping widows, right? And I'm sure that means widowers as well, and children. And if we're not ministering to those people, there's a reason that God knew ahead of time that they would need ministering to. Can any of you imagine what your husbands would be like? This is a really morbid thought, but what if your husbands outlived you? How do you think they would do?
He'd read.
He'd be okay.
He'd be okay. He would love to just sit and read. That would be.
Is he an introvert?
Oh, very. Yes.
Isn't that interesting? Because as outgoing as your husband is super, just so talented and gifted in so many ways, and appears to be really outgoing, but he's an introvert.
And he loves being with people, but it drains him. And being alone and reading and studying and fills him up.
Right. Anybody else? How you think your husbands would do?
Now that my kids are older, I'm okay. I'm like, all right, take care of Dad. He'll be fine. But for a long time, I'm like, oh my goodness, who will do the books for him? Who will do? He'd be fine.
How about Archbishop, I should say.
Oh yeah,
Archbishop Wiggins.
Archbishop.
I think he would have to get married again, because there's just so many dynamics to his life, and he is. You talk about men and loneliness. I think he would be lonely.
Yeah.
And so God would have to, if he took me, he'd have to send him a mate, because he would need that.
And
have you already
okay
approved of people?
Yeah.
Like I've
what's
done
your
that.
list?
Have y'all done that before? Okay, you can marry her, but not her.
Well, I have not done that.
You might want to put a list together.
No, let me just say for the record, she's going to have to be approved by my daughter.
Exactly.
Miss Brandy is not having it.
There you go.
I might make a book list.
There you go.
That's
funny. How would Chris be?
I think he'd be okay. I think he'd be so sad.
Of course.
But no, I think he'd be all right. I think he would marry again, for sure. But I'm okay with that. I think. I mean, I would want. My hope would be that a woman would come in that would love my kids.
Right.
That would just cultivate a relationship.
That's a difficult thing to think about.
And if I can say this, I have already said to my family, if something were to happen to my husband, I would be the best grandmother in the world, and I would not get married again.
Amen to that.
I don't want to work that hard at, making the relationship with someone else. I feel like I have the love of my life right now, and I'm good with having one.
You just never know, Miss Deborah. You never know. I've told people all through the years, I said, I'm not training another one, but you just don't ever know. Let's close with a scripture, because we're almost out.
I got a good one.
Okay.
Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.
Amen.
Matthew 11:28.
Who said that?
Jesus.
Yeah.
Is this a trick question?
Right. Jesus.
That's always the right
Jesus
answer.
always the answer.
Always right. Anybody else have a good one?
That's perfect.
That's it?
I thought that was good.
All right, let's close with that one then. Ladies, thank you so much for your insights and caring for each other and caring for me like you did, and all the good advice you all gave to me. I appreciate that. And if you are a caregiver out there, our prayers go out to you. Seek the kind of help that God would have for you. There's a great community of believers that can come around you and help you as well. And so thanks for being here with us today. We've got more coming up, so stay with us.
I could not have navigated the waters I had to navigate without my faith. My Lord was there for me and gave me the strength, and frankly, I think He gave me wisdom on some of the choices I made, some of the decisions I made as a caregiver, so that I don't have all the regrets that I see in so many men.
Viewers, I'm so glad that you joined us today. This is such an important segment of our program. We're going to be talking to an author of a book called The Widower's Journey. Perhaps you are a widower out there listening today, or even a widow, or someone who's lost a loved one. How do you handle that grief? Who's your advocate to teach you and to help you get through the kinds of grief that you're experiencing? Our guest today is Herb Knoll, and he has personally gone through the grief, is probably still going through the grief, and he's going to help us today understand how we can care for the caregiver and also what we need to be doing to help rebuild our lives after a tremendous loss. You lost your wife. First of all, we're very, very sorry.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank
you. Just know that our hearts go out to men and women who have lost spouses, lifelong spouses in your case. You'd been married, Herb, for how long?
We were 16 years at the time of her death, and she was only 52 when I lost her.
Yeah, that's very, very young.
Yeah.
And so what impressed upon you the need to write The Widower's Journey? This is a book about your journey, but it's also a book that you wrote because you have a heart to help other men, in particular men, widowers, know how to cope.
After I became a widower, I realized that I fell into a state that was not comfortable, was not what I was accustomed to. And I knew I needed help. One of my employees on my staff walked up to me one day and said, "The entire floor misses your laughter."
Oh.
And I knew then that, okay, I needed to get some help. So I started searching for help for a widower. And to my surprise and disappointment, I walked into a large national chain bookstore, and I asked the gentleman behind the counter, "What do you have for a widower?" Well, he said, "Just a moment, please." And he typed widower into his search engine. And then he looked up at me and he said, "I don't have a thing for you."
That's amazing.
And I had been published in the past. I always had hobbies that I did. And before I left that bookstore that day, I realized that I needed to see if I couldn't write a book to help men going forward. There's 2.7 million widowers in America. Out of every 5 men that we know, one will become a widower. And they have so many problems, including not only their grief and their inability to come over it, but they have substance abuse problems, they have financial problems, they have career problems, relationship problems. They have lots of problems, and their health issues are huge.
There's suicide's an issue too, isn't it, with widowers?
Actually, yes. The widowed men are 3 to 4, depending on which research you look at, more likely to commit suicide than a married man.
That's crazy.
They have increased rate of hypertension, increased rate of diabetes and other ailments because the body can't withstand long-term stress. So things start breaking down. And I became a victim myself. My very first day back at work, I fell in my driveway, collapsed, and my son found me in the driveway and rushed me to the hospital, and I had kidney stones. And I don't know if it was related to my 3.5 years or so of being a caregiver, but I'm very suspicious.
Yeah. Well, there's a great deal that we don't really understand and know about stress and how stress affects our bodies. And in particular, when somebody goes through grief, enormous, deep grief, it's real and it's doing something to our bodies. Do you think that men, from all of your research, you know what I'm getting ready to ask you, have a harder time, a widower, than a widow does?
There's no question about it.
What's the deal with that? Do you need us that badly?
Yes, we do need you that badly because you keep us healthy.
Okay.
And I remember when I was a caregiver, people continually said to me, "Watch your health, watch your health." And I kept on saying, "But it's my wife that's sick. Why do you keep saying that to me?" Well, after the fact, I learned that my body was going through a very difficult time, and men who are caregivers have a tendency to defer to their wife's pain and not their own. So they don't go see a doctor. They say, "Oh, that pain will go away," or "I'll take an aspirin," or "Maybe I'll have a beer, but I'll make it go away somehow." And that's a mistake. They need to be seen. And one of my cardinal rules are for all widowers is to be seen by a medical doctor. Every single one. I literally went to Vanderbilt University. I was living in Nashville when my wife was first diagnosed. And I wanted to be examined by a psychologist. I said, "Tell me I'm properly anchored. Tell me I'm thinking clearly.
Well, that was smart.
Tell me I'm taking care of my wife with the best abilities that I have." The good news was they said yes. But I need that reassurance because you don't know if you're on top of your game and you don't know if you're making good decisions. And when you can take care of some of those things during the period of illness, you don't have the regrets later. And when you have regrets to deal with after your wife passes, the grief is much longer and much more painful.
So what has it looked like for you? I know a little bit about your wife, that she died of pancreatic cancer,
Right.
2008, right? 2008.
Right.
What was life like, Herb, after she died for you?
Empty. And I'm pretty outgoing and pretty self-assured, but I was an island.
But was there not a little bit of a sense of relief in that she had been suffering for so long? Was there a piece of that?
Certainly, yes. Yes, but you're isolated, and it's painful. And people try to come to you, they try to help you, they give you ideas, and you're not really receptive. And you don't really feel free to express yourself, because after all, you're a man.
Yeah.
And in America, unfortunately, we hold our men to a different standard than we do our ladies.
Be strong, don't cry.
Be strong. There were 3 men who, I had 40-some men participate in my book.
Good.
And they shared their stories. 3 men backed out. So I called up all 3 of them, and I said, I'm not here to convince you to come back in, but just tell me why. Well, the first gentleman said to me, it's too painful to have these conversations with you. The second gentleman said, the new lady that I'm seeing, she doesn't like me talking about my deceased wife. So I said, okay, you need to find a new lady, because she's not mature enough to deal with the fact that you had a wife for 30 years.
Yeah.
But the third gentleman, I thought, really captured the moment when he said to me, it's not manly to have these conversations with you.
Wow. Wow.
And that's exactly
Yeah.
what men feel,
Yeah.
that they don't, that they're not free to express themselves, because all their life they've been told boys don't cry.
Well, and women are supposed to be the emotional ones, and you guys are supposed to be rational. So why are you going through this hard time, Herb? You've just lost your wife, and you don't know how to navigate this journey. It was a hard journey. It's probably still a hard journey in a lot of ways, right?
Well, you have triggers.
Okay.
You'll go by a restaurant that you remember
Yes.
what your deceased wife wore that day, or who we were with, or there's one man in my book, he puts his wife's perfume on his pillow every night.
Wow.
There's another man who has yet to remove his wife's slippers from the side of the bed.
Is that okay?
Yes, he's grieving.
Okay.
And he's grieving.
How long can you do that, though?
As long as you need to.
Okay.
There used to be this expectation that grief went in a certain pattern, a certain cycle.
And for a certain length of time.
Right.
And then
now,
stop.
All that's debunked.
Okay.
That's gone.
Okay.
You can, well, I sort of have fun with this with my 7 sisters. When they go into a mall, they don't go to one store and come back out. They go in and bounce all around. Well, that's what grief is like.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You could revisit an earlier feeling that you have 2 years, 3 years, 4 years later. So it never really goes away. You just adjust to it.
Yeah. Tell us about this publication that you've done that's really about stories that could help our viewers.
Yes, I would be pleased to talk about this. This is the Michelle's Angels Foundation Hope Trilogy. And what we do with this, I formed a foundation in honor of my deceased wife when she was still alive. And we continue to do a lot of really good things for people. But one of the things that we discovered is that people who are suffering sometimes lose hope. And when you lose hope, it's very difficult to recover from it. Right. So we decided to do a Hope Trilogy, which is a story of 3 different men and the incredible battles in life that they had to face and how they overcame it. And I mean, these are breathtaking stories, including one gentleman who's a friend of mine. He's had a double lung transplant twice. Yeah. So he's actually had 6 lungs in his life. And there was a moment when the doctors said to his wife, we need to disconnect his life support. And her response was, only God will decide when my husband dies. And he's living today in San Antonio, Texas.
Unbelievable.
And so there's some great stories, and we're making this available to anybody, any of your viewers who wish to have it. I'll be happy to send it to them.
We can go to your website, right?
They can go to my website, they can register there, and there's a note field, and they can just simply say, send me the Hope Trilogy, and we'll be happy to send it.
And then we can find out more about your book on that website as well. And this network, you have a widowers support network, a bunch of people that can come together to help. Mostly, what do you do? Talk to these people?
Yeah, we mentor.
Mentor.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll mentor men, and we can do it privately. Men are more apt to take advice and counsel from another man on such a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
If you go to most of the
Yeah, true.
grief organizations that are out there, they're mostly populated by ladies, and I understand all that. So we try to fill that void by giving away our phone number, and people can call us, and I will take a call in the middle of the night if necessary. And if I'm not available to help somebody, we will find another mentor for them.
So what is the biggest complaint that a widower, when he calls you, what is it the loneliness thing? Is it, I don't know what to do, I don't know how long until I start dating? What are some of the issues that widowers are facing?
I would say the big one is that people have expectations of them that are unrealistic.
Okay.
Why are you not over it yet?
Oh.
Why isn't he back in the game? And then it's compounded by the fact that ladies in our lives tend to be the gatekeepers of the social calendar.
True.
So when the wife passes away, suddenly this man becomes even more isolated because his support base retracts
Right.
and doesn't invite him because he's not on the inner loop anymore.
Right.
So, but
Should we be paying attention to widowers? Is that what our responsibility is as Christians?
absolutely, we need to
right?
pay.
Inviting them over?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, Governor Kasich from Ohio during the presidential campaign said, "Have you talked to a widow lately? To take one to dinner."
A widow.
A widow or widower. He said widow,
Okay.
but it applies to both.
Absolutely.
There's one widower in my book by the name of John, and John had a wonderful line. I asked him once, "What's the best thing that's happened to you during your period of grief?" And he said, "When I told my family and friends, leave me alone with my thoughts. I'm fine." They ignored my instructions and forced their way into my life, and I'm so grateful that they did.
Good.
You know, so don't listen to a man who says, "I'm fine." You know, force your way in and make sure that you're involved. Make sure he sees a doctor. Be there for him and don't pass judgment. Men don't need to hear that, you know, like they're being criticized. So that's probably what the biggest issue is.
Herb, let me ask you this. What part did faith play in your journey, not only after you lost your wife, but during the caregiving period where you were seeing her? I know before we went on the air, you told me she went from a size 8 to a 6 to a 4 to a 2 to a 0. So you watched a really horrific progression in her decline of her health. What part did faith play?
I could not have navigated the waters I had to navigate without my faith. There is simply no other way to answer that. My Lord was there for me and gave me the strength, and frankly, I think he gave me wisdom on some of the choices I made, some of the decisions I made as a caregiver, so that I don't have all the regrets that I see in so many men. And even later, when I was writing the book, and it was a very painful period. It was, it was satisfying. It was enriching, but it was also very painful because I'm dealing with a very difficult topic that I personally went through, and I'm reliving the lives of 40 other men and what they went through. And I did it for 9 years, so it takes a toll.
It took you 9 years to write this book?
It took me 9 years to research it and write it.
Wow.
And we're very, very proud of what we did. But going through all that, I came close to not finishing this book at least a dozen times. And I was sitting in church just a year ago, and I asked the Lord, I said, "If you want this book, you're going to need to send me a sign because I'm up against it. I mean, I'm worn out. This thing has beat me up." And the priest got up that day and gave a homily that was, I think, personally written from me. And I left church that day thinking, "Okay, Lord, you want this book, you're going to have it." And it was done in a matter of a few months after that.
Well, thank you
So
for what
it was
you've
a
done.
huge event.
Well, I appreciate that you've answered the call because it is not difficult. I mean, it is not easy to relive something that you've gone through that is so personal to you, and so you were so in love with your wife, and you don't necessarily want to have to rehash all of that. But I appreciate, Herb, the fact that you did it, that you have a heart for widows and widowers, in particular widowers who are out there, helping men and women rebuild their lives. If you would like more information on Herb's ministry, you can go to the website that's on your screen right now. That will direct you to some resources that will hopefully help you in your journey. And remember the faith part, that component. Herb said he could not have gone through this without God's help, giving him the strength. Remember that God loves you, cares for you, and he will will get you through your hardest time. So again, we thank Herb Knoll for being here with us today. The book is called The Widower's Journey. Stay with us. We have more coming up.
You know, a lot of people have a stigma about going to see a counselor, but I'm a big fan of counseling. You know, we go to a doctor once a year for a checkup. I'm kind of of the belief that we need to go to a counselor once a year for an emotional checkup.
Right.
And honestly, we probably need to sit down with some of our pastors and elders and say, hey, help me give a spiritual checkup.
What are y'all looking at? Recently on my prayer walk, I was listening to the book of Acts. In chapter 1, I heard something that was very interesting to me. After Jesus told the disciples to stay in Jerusalem until they received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, he then was taken up to glory. Well, the disciples looked up. They watched to see where he was going, and the word says, a cloud hid him from their sight. Next thing you know, they hear two men say, in Moe's Country Girl translation, what are y'all looking at? Maybe it was a little better grammar than that. But pretty much we meet two angels who tell the disciples, stop looking up. He'll come back. Why do you think this is in the Bible? Well, I think it's one of those pivotal moments where we're promised of Jesus' return. I think it's prophetic, of course, but I also think it's kind of a rebuke. I think these angels wanted the disciples to move on. Move on? Yes, can you imagine how tough it would be for the disciples who once could touch Jesus' flesh? They ate with him, they camped with him, they did daily life with him. To move on and fulfill the call on their life, whether he was there or not, I'm sure it was tough for them to imagine what that would be like. They didn't understand at this point that it was actually better that he leave so he could send us Holy Spirit. You know, my daughter's boyfriend just went away to college, and she misses him a lot. As a mom, it breaks my heart to see any of my kids sad. I have to admit, for about 2 seconds the first time I saw her cry, when he left, I thought, why did they have to meet before college? Why couldn't she have met him 4 years later and she wouldn't have to be sad now? Then immediately I changed my thinking. Because the truth is, I trust God's timing. It's always perfect. And I trust that God will strengthen both of their relationships with him first. Then they'll be stronger together later, should God will it. Can you imagine the disciples thinking, maybe it would have been better if we'd never known him? Then this wouldn't be so scary and sad. Come on, too real? They were humans like us. And now they were probably thinking, what in the heck do we do now? So quickly, to relieve their stress, the angels say, Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking up into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you've seen him go into heaven. Friends, he's coming back. I totally love how God is not the God of 10 minutes ago. He's the God of right now. God is not the God of yesterday. He's the God of today. God is not the God of 20 years ago. He's the God of right now, this second, even as you're hearing me speak. Our God is alive and active in our lives today. We have to stop fixing our eyes on the places he had us in the past. Yesterday's gone. He's doing something new right now. He wants us to be ready for it. He wants to baptize us in the fire of today. Are you fixed on something that God did in the past? Are you fixed on something you did in the past, good or bad? Is your head in the clouds and God is like, come on, my child. I'm trying to get you past this. I want to encourage you to fix your eyes straight ahead. Forgive yourself or anyone that you need to forgive for yesterday. Move on in the power of God's anointing and press on to watch him do something new. He's waiting for you to take that step. What are y'all looking at? For more on renewing your mind, check out my website, unforsakenministries.com.
Viewers, I'm so glad that you're with us here today. This is such an important program. When we're talking about caregivers and how we can show care and concern for those around us, I think it's something that we really need to be tuned into. Burnout is a big thing in our society. Doing too much, growing weary. And the Bible tells us, don't grow weary, keep working, don't retire. If you're out there today and you're tired, well, join the club. But we're supposed to continue on. And we have a couple of gentlemen today who are our guests who are going to really help us understand ways that we can get refreshed and renewed and to feel better and to be all that we can be, living victorious lives for Christ. And Chad Garman has been here. In fact, both of our guests have been here with us before. Chad is the YMCA Executive Director of Christian Initiatives and Community Partnerships, and he's here to tell us a little bit about what the YMCA is doing to come alongside wonderful pastors like Pastor Andy Searles with Church Together. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I love having our return guest, our almost winner of the Marriage Game Show. Congratulations for being a runner-up. Very proud of you.
Thank you for saying that.
You did great. We had so much fun.
Is your judge and jury still recounting the votes?
We're still counting, and the jury is still out on that. You might still get your number one prize. Right. You and Tracy were adorable, though. We had so much fun with you, so thanks for doing that. And Chad, now that you're doing what you're doing for the YMCA, tell us about Healthy Pastors, Healthy Churches.
So the YMCA of Central Florida has set a goal to affect the health lives of 600,000 Central Floridians. And we realize that we can't do that by expecting people to come in the doors of the Y. Mm-hmm. So we have to, just like the church, we have to go out into our community.
Good.
And part of my role and responsibility was to go out into the church community and see where we can partner together, see where it made sense for us to offer the programs that the Y is doing in the local church context. And it became very clear to us very quickly that we needed to take care of our pastors. Mm-hmm. Our pastors are tired. They're oftentimes not managing stress well. They're burning the candle at both ends, if not multiple, just ways that they're being torn.
Yes.
Burnout's a real issue for our pastors, and so we wanted to look at their health holistically, spirit, mind, and body. It's what the Y has been about for 170 plus years, and so we wanted to care for our pastors well. And so we said, what does it look like to care for them well? That as they stand before their congregation, they can say, hey, I'm on a health journey as well. And you can join me and you can join with me. And together we can be healthy for the kingdom. We can do what God's called us to do and be about as we take care of each other.
You know, Chad, I think most people think about the YMCA and they don't think holistic. They think, okay, go to the Y and you can get healthy physically. And they do a great job with that. But for you all to have a concern now for pastors to really delve into emotionally, what are they like? Spiritually, how are they feeling? How are they coping with all the stress? Pastors don't have a lot of people to talk to outside their wives and their families, right?
That's right. That's why we're here today, so I can lean on your shoulders.
So how has the YMCA in this initiative, this program, helped you personally, Andy?
I've loved what Chad and his team have put together. There are three components of it. The first is a physical training component. The second is a mental health component. And the third, a spiritual health. And we're about 2/3 of the way through the program.
How long is the program?
It's a year-long program.
Oh, wow.
But we started with the physical.
Do you meet weekly?
In different stages, have different times.
Okay.
So the physical was the first one, and that was a weekly meeting with a health consultant from the Y.
Good.
And she was fantastic. She helped with eating and exercise and accountability and all those physical things, which was great. And once that was completed, we moved on to some of the spiritual, emotional care. And through the generosity of the Y, they connected us with an organization called Care for Pastors, which is a resource in Lakeland that helps pastors maintain their emotional and spiritual health.
Ron and Rodetta Cook.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've had them on before. We love that ministry. They do a great job caring for pastors.
They do, and their staff is just fantastic.
Yes.
It is really.
Did you need that, Andy?
More than I realized.
Yeah.
More than I realized.
Yeah.
And the gentleman who I've been meeting with is actually speaking at our church soon, and I'm really excited about that. But we would sit together and we would have coffee, and he would just say, "How you doing? How you doing?" And I was amazed at just the words and the thoughts and the feelings that kind of came out of me.
Why were you able to open up to somebody like that rather than maybe your brother Chad here?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, this gentleman is outside of the sphere that I minister
So you
in,
felt
so
safe.
it was a lot safer
Yes.
to do that. Secondly, he was a seasoned veteran in ministry. You know, he's an older gentleman who carries himself with that grandfather demeanor, you know, and as we were talking, I just felt like a young kid, and he was excited by what I was doing, yet also cared deeply about what I could do. And
Because your family, your extended family, they're still in England, right?
that's right.
So you don't really have family here.
Sure.
Outside your immediate family.
Sure.
You don't
And
have
it's-
a grandfather or a father over here.
Right, and it's great to be able to pick up the phone
That's
and
great.
talk to family. But this was a blessing in a different kind
So
of way.
you made a real connection with this gentleman.
Yeah, we've struck up a friendship too.
Good.
Which you know, a lot of people have a stigma about going to see a counselor, but I'm a big fan of counseling. You know, we go to a doctor once a year for a checkup. I'm kind of of the belief that we need to go to a counselor once a year for an
Good.
emotional checkup.
Right.
And honestly, we probably need to sit down with some of our pastors and elders and say, hey, help me give a spiritual checkup on a regular basis.
So that was spiritual. The physical. What's the third component?
That was the emotional.
That was emotional.
So the third component is the spiritual.
Okay.
And,
so he wasn't your spiritual mentor. He was your emotional mentor.
yeah, there's a little bit of there's a significant
There's going to be an overlap.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the strength of the program too, is that they've designed it in such a way that there's not just overlap between the physical and the spiritual and the emotion. What am I trying to say? They all overlap.
Sure.
Right? We are whole people, and we certainly need to be whole people, and God calls us to be whole people. And so often we kind of compartmentalize. Can I say that again? What's what I'm trying to say?
Compartmentalize.
Yes.
Good, Chad. Thank you. I wasn't sure where Andy was going
this
with
is
that
another
one.
service that the YMCA provides. They help me with difficult words.
Enhancing your vocabulary. All right.
So it's a very holistic approach,
Okay.
and I appreciate that.
So you came up with the idea, Chad? This was your brainchild?
So at the Y, we love committees, right? Just like the church. So as we sat down with a mission group within the YMCA and talked about how could we care for our pastors, we just started getting all of these ideas about how we could care for the pastors, and we were able to take some existing Y programs, some partnerships that we were able to form along the way, and again, look at it holistically. A lot of the pastors that we talked with, we found out authentic relationships were something that they struggled with. There isn't that safe person,
Right.
because they're always having to be pastor.
So would you say that that was the number one thing that you've seen with pastors outside of Andy, the other handful of people that you were dealing with? The biggest area of need would be companionship, authenticity, friendships?
It's definitely a big part of how you become a whole person. We need each other. We've been designed and made to need each other and to fellowship with each other. And while we can find that in our spouse, oftentimes we try to protect them as well from what's going on. And so really finding that way to have that authentic relationship and to have someone to walk beside and walk along became a real important part of the process for us, and something that we really wanted to get outside of what maybe was thought of as the normal for the YMCA. and really invest in our pastors who are investing in us.
Chad, when we were talking before we went on the air, you were telling me there must be an enormous need because you sent out, I guess, an email to about 300 local pastors?
We did. We sent out that email to a little over 300 pastors. We had 33 pastors who filled out the application. We were only able to, in the first round, kind of take a fraction of those pastors and put them into the program. And so we still have a great need for the support.
Yes.
So more pastors can get involved.
So you're going
in
to
the
do
program.
this in year 2. After this first year, you're planning to do this again for another group of pastors?
We are. We're currently accepting additional applications for next year.
How would our viewers know to recommend their pastor if they wanted to? How
So
do
they
they
can
sign
reach
up?
out to me at the YMCA.
Okay.
And we can get you the contact information for how to email me your pastor's name, and I'll send out the application to them. They can fill it out. There's an interview with a team that just wants to get to know the pastors, where they are, and how can we serve you better, and then we'll go from there.
So Andy, if you could say that there's one thing, the biggest thing that you gleaned out of this, what would it be, this experience?
I think the overall program screams you're not alone, right? Often ministry can be very lonely.
Yeah.
You're carrying responsibilities that come with your position, which is a privilege, but it can get a little bit heavy sometimes. We're privy to information and troubles in people's lives that's not our story to tell, and we need to kind of carry that as a sacred trust. And as you do that, it's very easy to think that you're alone. But with the 3 different components, I think all of them say, hey, no, you're not alone. We want to help you to carry the load and to be the best that God has called you to be.
I can't imagine how difficult it would be, truthfully, to be a pastor. I know even as a mom and a grandmom and somebody who works here at the station, there are days, Andy and Chad, where I feel pulled at from every single direction. And I just sometimes want to have somebody hear me out and let me talk to them about how difficult life can be and how you can't meet the needs of every person. I mean, you've got a whole congregation there at church together of people who every person has a need, and yet they give it all to you. I mean, how difficult is that?
I think if we tried to do it in our own strength, it would push me under. But I think there's a lot of pastoral ministry, which really is about kind of trying as best we can to reflect Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So that as people come to us, we're inviting them to follow Jesus, and as people dump stuff with us, we seek to cast our cares onto Jesus as he invites us to do in Scripture.
Yeah, well, with Jesus, the burden is light. You know, I always go back to that verse, is that I can't carry the burden. The burden is Jesus's, and he will make it my shoulders light. Chad, let's talk about you for just a second. We're almost out of time, but just the fact that you have a heart for pastors, where did that come from?
Well, I did serve before coming to the Y. I served on a church staff, and so I understand a little bit about just a little bit about what our pastors are going through. And as I got to know the YMCA more, I realized that the church needs a lot of what the YMCA has, just as the YMCA has what the church needs. And so there's a beautiful relationship between the local body of believers at a church and a YMCA. And we're really community partners, and we're going for the same goal. And so when we can partner together, it becomes a beautiful thing.
Well, I appreciate so much what you're doing there at the Y in a lot of different areas. I know there are other initiatives too that the YMCA does, but for the community to grab hold of some of these opportunities, that's one reason we wanted to air this segment today, is to raise awareness of what all the YMCA does for you, for your churches, for your pastors, for individuals. The next thing that Chad's going to probably do is have an initiative to help talk show hosts. Would that be your next thing? Could you do that so that I have
We'll
a
get you
program
signed
like
up
this?
before I leave today.
That would be great. Any last thoughts? Any last things
You're
all
going to
want
need
to
a big
say?
team to manage
That's
that program.
right. That's going to be tough. That will be your biggest challenge. Anything else you guys want to say before we go on?
I just want to encourage the pastors. You know, it's hard. We know it is. You know it is. But you don't have to go through it alone. There are
Yes.
people to help, and the
Right.
Y has been a great blessing in my life,
Yes.
and I'm sure they can in yours as well.
Thank you. Andy Searles, Church Together, senior pastor there. I know what a wonderful work you're doing there. And Chad Garman with the YMCA, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having us.
God bless you, and may God continue to bless the YMCA as it ministers to all of us in the community. If you want more information about what the YMCA is doing, you can go to that website that'll be up on your screen for you. And stay with us because we've got more on caring for the caregiver. I hope you enjoyed our program today. God's word is clear when he talks about taking care of those who are marginalized, children and widows in particular. We would be wise to heed God's direction in this matter. I often wonder how lonely widows and widowers must be. To be connected to a spouse emotionally, physically, even spiritually for decades definitely makes us dependent upon them in many ways. I know when my dad died after being married to my mom for over 65 years, my mom was needing companionship again and actually sought it out after about a year of being without my dad. In fact, there's a sweet, sweet love story that ensued. My mom met a man named Bernie who has recently lost his wife of about that many years. They became fast friends, and now almost 7 years later, they are 94 and 95 years old, and they see each other pretty regularly. They go to church together when they can, and they seem to simply enjoy quiet times of friendship and companionship. They are a widow and a widower who are blessed beyond measure to have each other in their golden years. But you know, there are many others in our society who are in need of our attention, our help, and our resources, and of course, our prayers. I think it's our responsibility as Christians to seek out those who need our help, to be a friend, to share a meal, to sit with someone who is lonely and maybe just listen. The Bible tells us that God is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows and widowers, I would dare say. But he also expects us to be his hands and feet and to do some of the serving. Don't forget those who are alone. Remember to share what we have, and God will surely bless our efforts and our hearts when we show kindness to those in need. And that, dear friends, is our note of hope for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and God bless you.